welcome back. As I say in previous webinars, thank you for taking the time to join us. Today we're going to be talking about sources and stills. I have Jason Wines and Joel Terensky joining me. And actually, Joel's going to take the lead on this one again, because he's the holder of the Spyder. So with that, one quick note: I'm going to work on seeing how we can get people to get the actual download. See if there's a GoToWebinar piece of software, because sometimes you don't have as many options to view the cameras and the screen sharing. But if you download the app, I'm not sure if there's a user app. We'll see what happens. So anyway, I will hand over the presenter to Mr. Terensky here. And Joel, it's all you.
All right. Thank you. So just give me a heads up when you can see my screen. You should be able to see the back plane of the Spyder X80. Okay. Great. Okay. So sources. In X80, a source goes into, content gets inserted into a channel on the inputs. You're looking at an image here of a 24 input, 16 output. So representing in the blue on the left-hand side there is our inputs. Every input card has 4 input channels. Each channel has 3 connector options. So we have HDMI 2.0, DisplayPort 1.2, or 12G SDI. So you have any one of those 3 universal connectors that you can use on the inputs on the Spyder. Now remember, every input supports 4K 64 for resolution. So you have a lot of freedom there as far as connector types and resolution coming in. Okay. So I wanted to make sure we started there, so you have a basis of what inputs are on the Spyder. Okay. Now we'll move into the software side. So in my software workflow, I have a source panel on the left. I have some sources that are built, but we'll go through, we'll build sources as we go along here. So the source panel is something that can be viewed or hidden under the View tab, which Peter touched on a little bit. So we have it activated, it's checked, and there's the Source tab. Also in this window pane, if I click on a tab and then below, it's the stills. So I can load still images into this still panel as well. So I have a whole list of still images there. So I'm really going to touch on sources and stills today, okay? So when I click on an empty slot in Spyder on the input on the source panel, over here on the right-hand side, I'm going to have my properties for that. Right now, there's really nothing defined because it's an empty slot. I highlight an existing source that I have built, and a little bit more information. But we're just going to go through and build a new source. Okay, I'm going to flip my camera so you can see my multi-viewer monitor, and so you can kind of follow along what the source config. So let me do that. So there's my multi-viewer. It's just a representing the all program, or the program of the video wall. When I highlight the empty slot here, I'm going to have options over here on the property panel. So what is the name of the source going to be? Well, maybe it's called Media 1. Connector type or input type, which one of those 3 connectors do I want to use? If you leave it on auto, it should choose, but best practices is I always define the input connector type. So let's just say it's going to be HDMI, right? And then we get down to this router. So if we have a upstream video matrix router, this is where we would reference that. I don't have that, so my inputs are physically connected directly into the Spyder. And then the input, what number am I, what channel am I coming into? So I'm using, right now I've got sources coming into like 1 through 9. So this is the first one HDMI. When I build this configuration, this source, do I want to build a new input configuration? Do I want to link an existing configuration already established in my source list? Or I can copy over an existing configuration file. Build a new configuration. In Spyder, every source has a input configuration associated with it. Therefore, I can have multiple input configurations for the same input. And I'll kind of show for you as I go through here and building some of these. So I've got an empty slot. I call it media 1, HDMI, input 1, stereo options if we were doing some stereoscopic sources, which we're not today. Here's where you can build active and passive content. And I'm going to create and input. I have an option here to create and add another. That's if I'm going to be doing source after source after source, and I'll show that as well. But let's just click this one here. So you're going to notice my configuration monitor. You're seeing, and it did essentially an auto sync. So that source that was plugged on in input 1 needed to detect the pixel clock of that source. And when I click build, it's looking at it, after the pixel clock auto. The resolution goes up right here under input config. So you see the white border that's around my content. That's the edge of the monitor, and then the video itself is the bounded box side. Input configuration is very important. This auto tab right here is very important. Before I hit auto sync, it's going to detect timing. So if I'm changing graphics card resolution on the media player, and it's going to be jumbled, and I need to hit auto sync in Spyder or detect the new timing. So auto sync and save. Features fire off that save. Auto sync, save. Okay, that's my input. Now that data is my input configuration data. I've got some raster trimming I can do here. So if I'm seeing like buzzing lines on the edges of my content, I can trim my rasters left and right to drop out black lines or buzzing lines. So that's that raster right here. This data is down here into this kind of references what I'm getting off of the from the graphics card to the EDID on my input. So you can go through and adjust these, but it's really driven by the EDID more than anything. So the handshake between the graphics card and our input of the Spyder. I'll touch on EDID so you can see that as well. So input config, right? So now I'm adjusting input configs for source 1. I have levels, can adjust brightness, contrast, and hue and saturation, and some gamma. So I've got some handles here. These numbers are not referenced like a 0 to 2, I believe we go up to 2, right? So now I'm kind of going through and adjusting some brightness levels. And all of that data can be saved as an input config in Spyder. I'm going to hit the defaults there. I have some keying capabilities right here. So I'll show you how to do some keying. So I've got some cut and fill stuff I want to show you. So I want you to know that that's there, but I won't go there yet. And some crop features that can be tied to an input config. So it's not a treatment. It's literally locked into your input configuration file. So I could have multiple sources in my Spyder list, and one may be my standard auto sync. And maybe I have another source referencing the same number, but maybe I dip the color levels down so it's black and white. And that I can't present the sources at the same time. I have to mix off the new input or the old input and bring on input 1 with a new config. But you can have multiple variations of the same source in your source list. That makes sense. There's a also an advanced tab. I'm going to minimize that and fire off advanced. A lot of data here. Gets you into kind of the settings that you adjusted on your input config. Gives you your resolution that you're detecting, your vertical frequency, and get some chroma data. Again, most of this is tied into auto syncing with an EDID on our input. Okay. Another thing I wanted to highlight here on an input is you have some preferences here. So if I wanted to have a source that is going to have a treatment every time I bring out the source into the pixel canvas, into a layer. So here's a list of my treatments. I can assign a preferred treatment every time that source is dropped out onto the canvas. So if I wanted to do a yellow border, I'm gonna get out of this. I want to exit configuration source. Now you're just looking at my multi-viewer. If I were to bring and drop this source onto the pixel canvas, now you see in my multi-viewer it has a yellow border. So same thing with a preferred layer. I can assign a specific layer number. So every time it's brought out into the canvas, it uses that layer. That's a simple concept. Linear keying, and I'll show that during my cut and fill, but this is where you can assign your cut content. And then there's a backup tab here to go to your backup sources, which I'll build some backup sources as well. Just wanted to highlight everything that there is there. Notice when I select the source right here, I'm getting source properties in my property now. I don't get configuration properties. I will if I go into configure source, so right click, configure source, that goes into configuration monitor. Now I get that full display of content, of detail for the source. If I exit the config source, I can also access that data when I click on the source that's in a layer window. So when I click here, I'll get access to that same information. So a couple different places, very Spyder-like, different avenues of getting information, and just use your preferred one. Either right-clicking, configure source, or you can just drag the source out, highlight it, and then you get access to your information here. Okay. So let me go back into configure source. Really, the important aspect is this auto sync. When you're building sources, when you're going through just adding, auto sync save. Big one. I'm gonna fire off a way to just build multiple sources, one after the other. So I built one source, click on another empty slot. And then I've got the options here. Okay, what's this source going to be called? Media 2. Connector type, we're just going to stick with HDMI. Input 2 on the Spyder. Not using stereo, I'm going to use a new configuration file. And instead of create and configure, I am going to create and add another. So I'm just going to fire off my configure monitor changed. It's looking at input 2 right now. It's going to do an auto sync. There's input 2. And then it's going to allow me to build another source. So my configuration monitor drop back to my multi-viewer, and here's going to be my second. Just adding media 3 on input 3. Create and build another source. So here's my third source. Yep. And so on and so on. And I just keep going through. I've got my content plugged into the back of my inputs, and I know my connector type, my numbers. I can just sit here and go through my list and build sources. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So very, very easy to build, and really mistake in how it can add sources to your list. Okay. Nice little feature here as well as in my source list, I can drop thumbnails under. I can hit capture. Capture only works if I have HTTP disabled. With it enabled, it doesn't work. So capture grabs a still frame of the content, or can browse to a thumbnail that I had stored on my PC. And that's what I have here on the left-hand side. I have some thumbnails created, and I just drop them onto the source itself. Simple, right? Building sources, you can one at a time. You can just hammer them out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the auto syncing to the EDID, which I want to show you the EDID manager. I'm not going to go in depth, but I want you to be aware of it because it's an awesome tool. Under server, EDID manager. All right. So EDID is stored either in HDMI or DisplayPort. This is my list of my X80 24. I have some filters here. I want to show HDMI, or if I only just DisplayPort, I can do that. Or I'm typically using HDMI in my demo box here. And then here's factory default EDIDs that I have. And it shows right here on the right side what I have currently put it in for an EDID. On input 1, my HDMI, which is this right here, right? We have factory DisplayPort, UHD, 4K DisplayPort, HDMI. Type it in EDID. The box where I will apply file. Apply. And that's going to take the file, drop it right in here. I don't have a hot sync. I don't have a physical unplug the cable or plug it in. I just, when I drop EDID, I'll typically need to go back and hit auto sync on the input. So I'll close this out and go back to auto sync to do the pixel clock timing. Right? There's ways to import EDID right here. Exporting an EDID, you can send it, make a file. Read EDID from a display device. So we can pull the EDID and load it on an input. You can add EDID and do some custom management here. Get files in here. So that's just a real quick overview of EDID. And so that's where it lives. Server, EDID manager, put EDID on the inputs. Once you load EDID on, you want to go back to your source, go into your source, and then sync. And typically, just if you put in like on UHD, you hit auto sync, it's snap and save. Remember to hit that save. That's the big one. A lot of people auto sync forget to hit save. When you restart your machine, comes back, it's going to go back to the default sync config. So it's a heads up. Okay. So I want to show I have sources to do keying. I'm going to show you cut and fill. We can also key out luminosity and chroma. So we have some options for keying. Yeah, Peter, go ahead.
So we're having some issues with the audio quality.
Okay.
Like, yeah, it's dropping out pretty bad in some places. So what I was hoping maybe we could do is like it maybe narrate a little bit. I'm assuming that Jason, if you could pop on just for a second, just to verify that my audio is streaming okay.
Okay. You sound good.
That, okay,
yeah, you sound good, Peter.
So, so you're going to go into Joel. You're going to go into Hello? Oh,
Say again?
you're gonna show linear keying?
Cut fill.
Cut fill, right. So, Vince, can you mute your audio? I'm getting a lot of echo. There you go. Perfect, thanks. So and I'll just kind of, here we go. We're going on the fly here. So cut and fill. With cut and fills, they require 2 channel graphics, right? So you have a cut and a fill, which is a high contrast shape, right? That's going to be input into one of the Spyder's inputs. The fill is actually going to be the content that fills the white part of that shape, right? So those two have to either be choreographed and synchronized for them to work properly. Mostly you'll see that in a lot of stadium applications where they have graphics wash over the screen, right? So to set up, Joel, maybe we'll start with the cut source first. This is gonna be fun. So when we go in there, you'd still auto sync the same way, but then what you're gonna do is you're gonna go down to the keying tab down there at the very bottom. You'll see levels, keying, and crop, and you're gonna drop down the key mode and choose cut, right? So this is for the high contrast white on black portion of that content. Then, so you hit save, and then you would come out of that configuration mode, which you can do one of 2 ways. You can either right click on the source list over there where you see the wrench, or you can go back over into the property panel, and in the crosshairs of those tools in the property panel, you'll see one that says config mode, and that will just pop you out of that mode as well. So now we're going to go into the fill, and you again go ahead and sync up that source as normal by auto syncing, saving the format and everything. Now keep in mind, obviously the cut and fill have to be the same resolution, right? But you're not going to actually go into the linear key into the input config tab to set the fill. What you're going to go is into the source tab, and there's another tab in there called linear key, and that's where you're going to drop down the list where it says cut source, and you assign what is the cut source for that particular fill, right? And once you choose what it is, boom, at that point it becomes available to you. So you don't even necessarily need to go into config mode for that. I mean, other than to acquire the source, but once it's acquired, you can just basically bail out of there and go to the source tab. And then as Joel drags that fill source, you won't need to actively drag the cut source onto the pixel space. You just simply drag the fill source onto the pixel space, and it should do all the keying for you there. I'm not sure what your cut and fill source were, but
yeah, so you should be seeing cut and fill. Okay, so this is like a fire key.
I see Pandora box D1 still image. Like it's almost like it's the thumbnail.
You should be seeing the config monitor.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the simulator. My apologies. Wow, jeez, yes. Can you do me a favor and toggle the background? That might be a little more effective because then we can actually see the background come through it. There you go, and just resize the window down, and maybe it's kind of hard to see on that feed. It's a little pixelated and degraded there, but cut and fills are pretty straightforward. In X20, the only difference, actually there really is no difference. It's the same, straightforward. You set the cut up in the input configuration, and then the fill, you just go to the source tab and define what the cut source is. What else, Joel? I
have the 8K wide content.
Okay, let's go ahead and show that as well. So there are some parameters to, now when we say 8K wide, we mean only 8K wide, not 8K. We're not talking about a full 8K source, meaning 7680 by 3240. We're not doing that. Spyder will allow you to go in and actually set up an input to up to 7680 wide by 2160 tall. So we're using the bandwidth of that 4K source, but just putting it in a different horizontal and vertical resolution. So you can see in the input configuration there, he's got it synced up to 7680 by 1080. Now there's some rules to this. So 7680 by 1080, there are limits on that to be able to do that. In order to do that, your VI height cannot be taller than 2160. Okay. In order to achieve that resolution, you need to have your VI height set to 2160. So all of your pixel spaces have to be 2160 or less at that point. There's a sliding scale, and I'll import that slide into the recording. But you can see Joel's basically brought in that source in there, and it comes in at its native aspect ratio. And I believe you got a pixel space set up as well for that, right?
Yeah, I do. I have it set up off the right.
Yeah, I remember Infocom a couple of years ago, we had a 4x1 array of flat panels being driven from NST, right? So a single display port output from Spyder. And then we had a Pandora server generating 4 4K signals, 3 of which were typical, UHD signals that were 3840 by 2160. And then the 4th was this 7680 by 1080. So we were able to drive that 4x1 array with a single input for content and a single output for the displays. So very efficient way to handle wide aspect ratio content like that, right? And we can do that pretty much on every input, right? It's just like it's using the same bandwidth as a 4K. So we can do that. If you have 24 different sources that you want to do that with, you can go ahead and do that. But just the caveat for the 8K wide input is that your VI height has to be 2160 or less. Other than that, sorry to barge in on your presentation, Joel. The audio just got to a point. It bounced back for a little while, and then it started to degrade pretty bad.
Yeah. Okay.
What do we?
Maybe just highlight backup sources again.
Sorry, backup source. Yeah. So if you go over and click on PBA1, Joel, just click on it once. You go over to the property panels and you see the preferences that he talked about treatments or preferred layer, and then you also got the linear key. But then on the backup, that's where you can actually go in and define what source is going to be that source's backup, right? So if it's a source, or it can be a still image, right? So if you have a source already patched into the Spyder or coming in off a router, you can go ahead and designate it. Maybe we'll just go ahead and designate PBA2 as its backup. There you go. And then let's go ahead and clear the pixel space, drag PBA1 out onto the screen, or just simply replace that layer if you want. It's up to you. And there you go. So now, in the event that PBA1 were to go down for some reason, you can go directly over to the source list and simply right-click on the source and choose Use Backup. And what that will do, the minute you click it, it will dissolve the layer off the screen and bring up its backup source. Now, notice the little icon in the source list there, and now it has a little backwards arrow saying backup. And now the other source has the red dot, the red tally dot saying that it's in program. Now, the nice thing about this is that it allows you anywhere that PBA1 is programmed into a command key, it will automatically replace it with PBA2, okay? Until you do one of two things. You either right-click over there on your original source, and then simply just say switch to back. I think it says, can you right-click on PBA1? Right-click right there. There you go. So exit backup, and then what that does is just immediately dissolves it off and brings it back on again. Now you can tie those to a function key for quick access. I think he already has one set up right there, so you can have you choose what source, and that source list right where it says source, it only shows the one that actually have a backup assigned to it, right? So you're not going to get the whole source list. It'll only show the ones that have a backup for it. And then you got the option for the action, which is either switch to backup, switch to main, and or toggle, right? So you got those couple, switch to backup, switch to primary, right? So that one doesn't have a source set yet. PBB1 doesn't have a backup source set up because it says not set. There you go, perfect. And that, as long as you click it, you basically go and come back. And then if you hit it again, the toggle just brings it back and forth. So that's the backup source. I've got some cool ideas for backup source. We'll see if we can get any kind of new features implemented on that, but we'll see what happens. Anything else, Joel, Jason? Have we missed anything of?
Yeah, I didn't touch on stills yet, so when I go over some stills.
Yeah, stills. Oh yeah, stills, the other half of the webinar. Sorry.
Go ahead. Before you move on to the stills, can you touch on when you create a new source, what in the input configuration tab, what's the difference between a new input configuration, linking input configuration, and copying an input configuration?
Sure. Joel, tell you what, let me I'm gonna take back presentation here for a second, okay? So stills. I don't have a ton of stills in here, but still images are right next to the source tab, okay? And basically, you got a list here. You got a slider bar on the right, so you got mine is set to almost 500. There's a setting in the advanced, the tools, options, and in the bottom down here you can actually say max number, right? So you can change the number of sources, change the number of stills, change the max number. So I have it set to 500, right? Which is probably ridiculous, but oh well. So you can bring in stills via just simply coming over to the source list and right-clicking and say add images, right? And when you say add images, it'll basically bring up your file directory, and you can go in and let me find something here. We'll pull in Joel's. No, I won't do that. I was going to pull in Joel's headshot. Let's see, PC. Bear with me. Where are my images? So let's say 10-bit test patterns. I can just select multiples like this and just say open, and it'll import those into my configuration. That's literally transferring them from my client machine onto the Spyder server, okay? So now those are stored locally on the Spyder. Now, from there, you'll see you get a little reference on what the resolution is. And the thing is, you can load any, just like a source to a layer. If I drag a source on here and put it on the pixel space, I can then go to the still window and drag a still directly onto that. Okay. Still performance in X80 has been it's dramatically better. Okay. So when you load a still to a layer, you have to be careful because the still buffer size is 4096 by 2160. So that's the largest still it can load into a layer. So before it starts scaling. So if I have a still that's say beyond, I don't think I have anything that big in here, but let's say I have a still, actually I do, hold on one second here. Let me add one more. Widescreen, I got a bunch of these things in here. Something that's really wide. I have one very specifically that I'm looking for that I can't seem to find right here, 4889. So that's a big widescreen image, but notice it's 4889 by 1111. So it's beyond the size of our still buffer, but I can still load it into a layer, okay, and use it as a layer, but it's going to scale it down to 4096 and match the aspect ratio, okay? So you can load a still into a layer, and it will be native into that layer up to 4096 by 2160. Anything higher than that, it will be scaled down to 4096 by 2160, regardless of how you scale the layer up or down, okay? Now, backgrounds are a different story. You can load background images, still images, at native resolution. So if your pixel space is 8000 by 2000, you can go into Photoshop and create graphics that are 8000 by 2000, and they will load natively into that pixel space, okay? Those take a few seconds to load. You can load 2 for every pixel space, but you would have to manually load, preview, and program pixel spaces if you wanted to change them, okay? So you'd have to manually go on right-click, add preview, or there's some some external protocol ones you can do, but again, we had some cautionary tales about that. As far as the still list, there's other options here. You can insert one, delete one, rebuild. Basically just goes through the list and says, here, about to rebuild the still list. This will remove any existing registries, then recreate them using the available image files. It's a good way to scrub the file list there to make sure that if you've been restoring and backing up and pulling information, pushing information, those registries can get a little cattywampus. That's probably not a real term, but this is a way to go ahead and get those all synchronized, okay? And it'll take a second, and it'll pull in all the stuff I had in there, way too much. So anyway, that's a way to do that. The other way, as it starts to, my system starts, there's also a way to sync files. So you can actually, and I'm offline, so I really can't, a lot of it's grayed out, but there's two configurations in Spyder. There's the online configuration when you're connected to the physical Spyder, and then there's the offline configuration, which is the actual client machine that's just on your computer. Each of them have the same file directories. Each of them have a still folder that's in there. Those may not always be the same, right? They're not synchronized, at least automatically. So this is one way that you can either, you'll see there that you can say sync direction, which is either server to client or client to server. So depending on which way you want to go, you can sync the server to the client and it will match, or you can go the other direction, depending on how you want to do it. And then it gives you additional options to whether or not you want to, if there's a file there with a registry without an actual file associated with it, it'll create a new one, or you can just have it scrub it out and delete it altogether. So that's a way to synchronize your offline and your online configuration with regards to still images, okay? Let's close that. Other than that, other still items, things that are considered stills are, if I were to throw a source up here and I were to use the shaped borders, okay, that is a still function, okay? So that's something that utilizes a still internally, right? So if I can choose these different shapes in here. So that's one area. Another area is if you were to go into the pixel space, there's a function here for that's usually more commonly used in fixed installs or network operation centers, where you can add titling. So any layer that hits that pixel space will actually put a title of the source in the layer. So, you know, if it's a military application or something, they have different levels of classification, they can put a tag up there to see which one they're actually physically looking at. So other than that, that's pretty much it for stills. I'm just kind of glancing over the questions here. What happened to the load standard button, the old input configuration panel? Well, that is been scrubbed, okay? That's only available in the offline version, because in the online version, you're either syncing to EDID or it's just auto detecting, okay? We're not gonna force a specific format, but that's where you would handle that with the EDID manager. We'll have a separate webinar on the EDID altogether. Can you put a still in a mixer? Yes, you can, but only in Studio, okay? Only in Spyder Studio. That was a wonderful option now. So when we do, if I were to create quick command key here, I'm gonna call this mixer still. Now you can actually, let's clear that. I can start with a video source, convert to a mixer, and I can either just simply replace it by grabbing a still and dropping it right in there, and you'll see that it just swaps it out. And now when I relaunch this look, it'll just load that still image. And even with the scripting as well, you can also toggle back and forth between video sources and still images in your mixer element through the stills, through the script, okay? So yes, very cool. That was a big one. And because we're able to do that is because of the performance now, because of the X80's still performance. So anyway, I think we've got all the questions answered. Again, I think we apologize for the audio issues, and I'll try to, wherever it got a little shaky, I'll put in some closed captioning, maybe, just to kind of summarize the subject in the recording. So if you want to just come back in a couple days, we're looking at roughly 2-day turnaround for recordings to go up onto the YouTube channel. Okay. Any other questions or anything I've missed, boys?
So did you actually answer the linking input configurations?
Did I skirt around that? Did I skirt around that?
Yeah, you were.
What did I get sidelined by? All right, hang on. So new creates a new input configuration, right? Link would say, okay, of your existing sources there, which one would you like to link it to? Meaning they will always reference together. If you change one, it'll change the other, right? I've always used that example. I haven't used that in all but maybe a handful of times in the 14 years that I've been here, but it's there. A good application for that is if you're doing maybe an X20 or even now an X80, it's a stereoscopic configuration, and you want to make sure that both of those signals are the exact same timing, the exact same resolution, to where you can kind of force that. So that might be one application, or backup sources. Maybe, you know, if you have a redundant source that you want to make sure that the two are the same, you can do that as well. And then copy is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to copy any one of these that you choose, and it just creates an exact copy of that. So if I were to pick, like, let's call this Mustang 2, and then I come down here and I say copy Mustang and create and configure. So it's going to automatically create and save that. I can come out of here, and now it's just simply it's a duplication. That's all. It's a separate input config, but it's a separate source on a different input. That's all we're doing, is you just copied it. And I don't know how else to describe a copy, but that's how you would do that. Okay. Let's see here. Can I have a main and backup source coming in on the same input using two connectors? Ooh. It looks like Joel jumped on that grenade. While yes, you can. This is a tricky subject, right? I don't. Joel, if you still have the back panel.
Yeah, I've tested this. It's to work as expected. I don't know if that would be a recommendation to go that route, but it does seem to remove the resource and reintroduce the new one.
Yeah, I mean, in any case, that one, even if it wasn't the backup source, it was just another source coming into the same input, but only on a different connector. How the backup source performs is exactly how that would work if they were two separate sources. The caveat, the challenge with that is that any of those three connectors, you can only see any one of those three connectors at any one given moment on a physical input, right? So you have to be cautious with that. So I would say theoretically, yes, Joel said he tested it. So going to that, all it would do is just switch to one of the other connectors and you should be fine. Yeah. We appreciate your patience with all the technical difficulties. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Jason. And we'll catch up with you guys for the next one, okay? Thanks again.